The story kicks off with Yuseong Dan doing what any respectable background character does best, dying. Specifically, he's the last surviving member of the Marine Alliance's Meat Shield Brigade, going out not in a blaze of glory but in the slow, undignified way of a guy who just realized he was a side quest all along. A while back, Dan actually had the audacity to approach the higher-ups and remind them that their job, their literal sworn duty, was to win battles and keep people alive. Revolutionary concept. The chiefs, however, were far too busy executing their most impressive technique yet, the ancient art of strategic relocation, also known as running away while leaving everyone else to die. The dispatch was forced, the plan was garbage, and the escape was flawless. 5 stars for the chiefs, 0 stars for Dan. As instructed, Dan heroically leads the surprise attack, which turns out to be about as effective as sending one guy to storm a castle with a strongly worded letter. The entire alliance gets wiped out, not reduced in numbers, not suffered setbacks. Wiped. Dan lies on the ground, bleeding, cursing the privileged Murim upper class who were never going to show up anyway, and still cannot believe he got played like an NPC in a tutorial zone. He coughs up blood as the ugly truth becomes impossible to deny. His injuries are terminal. The alliance was doomed from the start because of some guy named Chiyama, and Dan was always going to be the throwaway pawn in someone else's chess game. His life begins to flash before his eyes. Memories of his dad telling him to work harder, work harder, work harder. He really did grind his entire life, absolutely sweated out every ounce of effort a man could give. And what did he get for it? A one-way ticket to dying in a ditch with nothing but bitterness and a chest full of internal bleeding. He screams that hard work means nothing if you're born without talent. And with that absolutely unhinged final monologue, he takes his last blow and dies. But instead of a peaceful death like a normal person, the universe decides to gaslight him. System panels start popping up. Murim Online has entered the chat. Rather than rest, Dan gets yeeted straight into a full system restart. Memories intact, personality intact, and absolutely zero chill about any of this. The system syncs his data, reconstructs his past self from his own memories, and sends him back to a timeline just before he enrolled in the military academy. Basically New Game Plus, except nobody asked him if he wanted to replay. Dan's eyes snap open. Before he can even begin to process the existential horror of what just happened, his dad cracks him over the head with what we can only assume is maximum parental velocity. Dan, operating on approximately 0 brain cells, concludes he must be in the afterlife, and that his dad has simply come to escort him to whatever comes next. And so, with the logic of a man who has fully given up, he lies back down to take a nap. His father, who has clearly done this before, attacks again, this time with the legendary broomstick. He scolds the boy for goofing around and reminds him that today is the enrollment exam for the military academy. Dan still thinks this is the afterlife. His dad is exactly the same as always. The scolding is familiar. The chaos is familiar. Everything is familiar until the word enrollment finally cuts through the fog and slaps him back into reality. He'd completely forgotten about the Qianbong Military Academy, founded by Taigong Chen of the Manhwa sect, a man so committed to gatekeeping knowledge that he exclusively passed it down to his own disciples. No exceptions. Classic. Despite being a textbook elitist, the guy somehow kept the Murim Alliance peaceful for hundreds of years, which made him a legend. Children across the land grew up idolizing Alliance warriors, dreaming of becoming one themselves. Rich, poor, male, female, didn't matter. Hope is free. Hope is also dangerous. Society, as it tends to do, evolved into a perfectly sorted ranking system. At the top, the Golden-born, clutching their silver spoons since birth. Below them, the Silver-born, who at least had a spoon, even if it was a bit tarnished. And at the very bottom, holding literally nothing, the Dirt-born. No talent, no wealth, no future. Dan is very clearly a certified Dirt-born. His father, unwilling to let his son live the same miserable life he did, worked himself to the bone just to afford the tuition. That was 30 years ago. And somehow, impossibly, it is happening again, right now, in front of him. Dan tries to put the pieces together. A moment ago, he was face to face with Cheon Ma, and got murdered. Now he's back in his old room. His father is throwing boiled potatoes at him like always, and a floating red panel with mission text has appeared in front of his face. He asks his dad if he can see the strange floating window full of words. He earns a scolding, so he pockets that question forever, chews his potato, and heads toward the military academy as exam day memories slowly come trickling back. When his eyes land on the 2 flags at the entrance, the weight of it all comes crashing back. The black flag is for the priority disciples, the chosen ones, the main characters. The white flag is for everyone else, the stepping stones, the background extras, the ones who exist to make the main cast look better by comparison. Dan remembers this as the exact moment their fates were sealed. Black flag disciples get trained directly by the High Lord himself. White flag disciples get to dream of becoming a gatekeeper someday. Our boy is visibly fuming because this is where it all went wrong the first time. But this time he knows everything. He rushes into the exam hall with a dangerous mix of determination and 30 years of repressed rage, and he notices his mission panel has a time limit. He figures out he has about 30 minutes. Plenty of time. Probably. Inside the hall, he'll be assessed by 3 people. Homan the Spear Lord, Master Ma the Black Tiger, and Tagong Chain himself, the Celestial High Lord in the flesh, looking mildly bored. Chain asks what he's looking around for. Dan, doing his absolute best not to blow his cover, blurts out that he was just wondering what the test would be. When pushed to guess, he calmly deduces from the shapes and sizes of the veiled objects before him that it must involve Che point manipulation. The room goes quiet. The High Lord narrows his eyes. The boy just gave a suspiciously correct answer, and now everyone is wondering if he cheated. Dan doubles down, calmly explaining the logic. Different sized dummies, training tools for precision work, chi point exercises requiring multiple practice targets. He keeps talking until the explanation sounds reasonable enough that it would be rude not to believe him. The High Lord finally acknowledges the deduction and tells him to demonstrate. The dummies lunge forward. Dan, small, physically weak, completely outclassed in raw power, uses the one thing his child body actually has going for it: agility. He dodges, he weaves, he moves like someone who has been in enough fights to know exactly how not to get hit. Even without the strength he had at 40, his body can at least get out of the way, and sometimes that's enough to start. Flashback just a few minutes earlier, the three judges have been sitting there watching candidate after candidate fail spectacularly. The dummies, designed after real humans and only beatable through direct chi point strikes, have been having a field day. The High Lord is one yawn away from a full nap. The Spear Lord starts getting nervous. At this rate, only So-So, the High Lord's daughter, is going to pass, which means she'll have nobody decent to train against. The High Lord gets a headache at the thought because a student with no competition doesn't grow. She just gets comfortable. The Spear Lord floats the idea of just failing the next kid outright, some peasant from the middle of nowhere. The High Lord, in an uncharacteristic moment of charity, decides to give him a shot. Dan walks in. The judges clock immediately that this boy has the physical presence of someone's younger cousin who showed up to the wrong event. 0 visible strength, 0 intimidating energy. And then he moves. He dodges the first dummy's attack like he's done it 1,000 times, because he has, and strikes its chi point almost effortlessly. Clean, precise, completely unlike anything they've seen today. But then comes the giant dummy, the one that has a tremendous amount of chi powering it, the one that flattened Dan spectacularly in his previous life. He knows immediately that brute strength isn't going to cut it. So he does what any man with 30 years of experience and 0 brute force would do. He gets creative. He latches onto it, repositions, finds the hip chi point, massages it to disable the flow, then punches the dummy square in the face with everything he has. The three lords stare, not at the power, at the audacity. He used an orthopedic massage technique on a combat dummy in a military exam. The High Lord is speechless. The Spear Lord is speechless. Master Ma is speechless. Nobody has ever used physical therapy as a martial arts strategy in this exam, and honestly, they don't even have a category for it. As it turns out, Dan memorized an entire book from the future specifically dedicated to defeating opponents stronger than yourself. That book just earned him the exam. While he's doing a little victory lap in his own head, a spike of power surges through him. The system activates. Mission complete. He receives medicine, the Golden Dragon Sword, and a power called the Third Eye. He has no idea what the Third Eye does yet, but the sword and medicine are clearly priceless. Life, for the first time in a very long time, is looking up. He barely has a second to process any of this before a large, beefy arm wraps around his shoulder. Without thinking, he immediately blurts out the guy's name. Jihu Jiang is understandably confused. They've never met. Dan explains nothing and instead gets distracted by the floating text above the stranger's head, because his newly activated Third Eye skill is apparently already working. He introduces himself quickly and figures out that the skill lets him see names and power levels as numbers. As Gihu wanders off, a third voice cuts into the scene. A girl, pretty confident, radiating energy that immediately says, "I don't have time for either of you," makes her entrance. This is So-So, daughter of the High Lord, and she is not here to make friends. Jihu, who has apparently decided he is constitutionally incapable of not antagonizing her, jokes that she only passed because of her dad. So-So steps on him. Literally, then she glares at Dan, who is apparently looking at her the wrong way, and he apologizes so fast it barely counts as speech. She then attacks Gihu again for the Nepo baby comment. The Spear Lord walks in, visibly exhausted by the fact that she's already picking fights before the ceremony, and announces the exam results. Dan ranked first, Gihu second, So-So third. Nobody expected that. So-So has a visible spiritual malfunction at the idea of being outranked by two guys she just met, one of whom she nearly stepped on and the other who apologized to her for existing. The Academy, as far as she's concerned, has made a grave administrative error. The welcoming ceremony happens. The masters are introduced. Gihu declares he's exhausted and barely survived the High Lord's lecture. He then casually jokes that he almost forgot whose father the man was, which predictably detonates So-So immediately. They part ways. The next morning, Dan oversleeps. On his very first day, he runs to the Academy's front door and watches an angry bald man slam it shut directly in his face. Gihu appears, helpfully explaining that oversleeping is actually fine because rest is important for potential or something. He then immediately invites Dan to spar. Dan panics. The system, ever helpful, pops up a new mission: defeat Gihu. Dan has been reading up on the three-sword style, a foundational system of 3 principles underlying all martial arts, when his study session gets rudely interrupted by the sound of Gihu doing what Gihu does, hunting down anyone nearby and forcing them into a fight purely for entertainment. This guy, it should be noted, is not a normal person. Gihu is a certified combat addict who loves fighting the same way most people love their morning coffee, deeply, daily, and with a level of dependence that is probably unhealthy. He graduated at the top of every exam, eventually became the 8th master of the Alliance, and could already use wind-based attacks at 16. The kind of prodigy who makes you question what you've been doing with your life. Dan starts reconsidering the mission. He's level 2, Gihu is level 9. The failure penalty is 0 initiative for 1 hour, whatever that means. And none of it sounds good. But the reward is a real martial arts skill. And despite his legs basically going on strike from fear, he musters every ounce of his 30 years of experience, courage, and steps up. Gihu opens by trying to grab Dan's face like it's a melon. Classic. Dan strikes a chi point in response and attempts a punch. He misses the punch. He takes a smack to the face. But the chi point strike staggers Gihu just enough to matter. Dan follows up with the 8-method orthopedic technique from the future, which Gihu counters by slamming him directly into the ground. Dan gets up, he's already learning. He puts distance between them and thinks about his strategy. His 30 years of experience, he realizes with some disappointment, is largely useless in a child's body. He's working with new hardware running old software, and the performance benchmarks are not great. Gihu, genuinely impressed, asks if Dan can use the sword style without an actual sword. Dan watches his movement and reads it perfectly. The vertical Titanic mountain crusher, a Heaven's technique. Heavens is weak against Earth. He counters with the 1,000 army swing. It almost works. Then a wind blast sends him flying, and he loses. The system delivers the penalty. Gihu remains impressed and argues that without the wind blast, Dan would have won. Dan, for his part, is stunned that this 16-year-old can throw wind blasts at all, something he himself only barely mastered at 40 the first time around. Then Dan passes out. He just faints. Mid-conversation, Gihu tries to wake him up, reminding him that skipping the first day of class would be deeply embarrassing. Dan, unconscious, does not respond. As the scene shifts, more than half an hour has passed and Dan awakens to find himself being stared at by the Black Tiger. Master Mog scolds him, complaining about how hard it was to carry him all the way to the drill hall, and asks if he skipped sleep last night. Dan notices that his mission is still active but ignores Master Ma. The master grabs him by the cheek and thrusts him toward where Giho is crouching, telling him to join in on the punishment. They are made to run 100 laps, and instead of worrying, Giho looks excited, having already finished 10. Just as Giho proposes a bet about who can finish faster, Dan receives a new mission. With no choice but to attempt it, he soon ends up completely worn out, drenched in sweat, and barely able to move his legs. Just when he thinks he cannot go on, the system triggers, raising his vitality by 1 point and healing him by 10%. Dan recovers just enough strength to get back into the race, determined to somehow finish it. Seeing the two, Master Mao looks confused, wondering if the kids have forgotten that this was supposed to be a punishment. As the story fast-forwards, Dan awakens once again after having passed out from losing. It doesn't seem like much time before he could become a complete laughingstock for his streak of fainting. Just then, Suzu appears, and Dan can't help but stare at her, feeling himself blush. She has come to find out why he skipped class, and learns that he was being punished. Suzu admits that she is quite a beauty, but warns him not to fall in love with her since she is already engaged. Dan feels embarrassed for losing control over himself and quickly gets up, asking if she is engaged to the house of Sachion, which surprises her because she did not expect that information to be out yet. Our boy recalls that the Sachion will be annihilated by their enemies in just a few years, wondering if these years will be hard for Suzu. At the same time, he worries that the girl might become heartless if she does not end up marrying there. Dan quickly snaps out of his matchmaker daydreams, realizing that his top priority has to be understanding the mission and reward system, because slacking off now would only mean getting screwed the same way he did in his previous life. Just then, the system triggers a level up, and his permanently active skill, the third eye, rises to level 2. He is startled to discover that he can now see the age of anyone using this passively active 6 skill. Noticing the improvements in both his vitality and third eye skill, he wonders if he could continue growing stronger through hard work even if he fails missions. Before leaving, Lady Suzu reminds him that she came to tell the boys that Master Ma wants an audience with them. Dan looks around for Giku, who is napping on a tree branch. The two of them head to the Master's office and find the High Lord present as well. With his third eye skill now leveled up, Dan can at least see the names of the Masters, though nothing beyond that. However, seeing the High Lord there, Dan feels a wave of worry, remembering that Chion's scoldings are said to be the worst. The High Lord surprisingly goes easy this time, warning them that if it happens again, they would be forced to run 500 laps before leaving class. After that, the two are dismissed. Dan acts surprised, not expecting to be let off so easily. As he is about to leave, the High Lord calls him over, telling him to come see him the next morning. Dan worries that he might have messed up somewhere, but he leaves anyway. As the top disciples exit, the High Lord remarks that this year is going to be an interesting one. That evening, Dan visits the training center, feeling an unmeasurable level of excitement because in his previous life he was never even allowed to enter. He picks up a sword, fully aware that the foundation of a martial artist must be built from childhood. And once that time is lost, there is little a warrior can do to ascend. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, he decides to train himself even after class hours. Dan begins swinging the sword, and just as he expected, his sword proficiency steadily improves. He still doesn't understand how all of this is happening, but one thing is clear: he has hit a huge jackpot with this ability. By the time night falls, Jindo Gong, a senior from the Chunsung sect, arrives with his lackeys. He notices the wooden sword in Dan's hand, and immediately wonders why the newbie is carrying his training sword. In his former life, Dan found himself getting crushed under the guy's dirty feet while he hurled insults at him non-stop. Apparently, this was his punishment for daring to say hi to a senior. Jindo was disappointed that the boy still did not understand his place. He then asked his lackey to keep watch as he beat up Dan to make it clear he was a junior. Dan curses his bad luck for picking up the sword that belongs to Jindo. The guy's lackeys instantly yell at Dan to drop the sword that does not belong to him. However, Jindo tells his goon to calm down because Master Tagong is watching from above. Seeing that, he grows curious about who this boy is, that even Master Tagong would bother watch over his training. He tells his goon to leave because he wants a personal talk with Dan alone. On the other hand, our boy panics because the guy is almost as strong as Gaiho at level 8. Jindo introduces himself as one of the 9 clan heads and assures him he is not petty enough to fight over a sword. But when he asks our boy which clan he belongs to, Dan confidently asks him back if that really matters at all. Hearing that, the guy quickly catches on that he is a nobody. He is surprised to see that this year's top recruit is a mere peasant, one who does not even know how to treat his seniors with respect. Our boy fires back that he knows quite a few things about his clan and says he would be honored to face him in a duel. With that said, he walks away stiffly as his heart pounds wildly with fear. The next morning, he wakes up unrested because it is hard to fall asleep after picking a fight with an elite. You see, the military academy accepts talented individuals from the noble families of the 9 sects without any test. One of them is Jindo Gong, who was last year's top disciple. Dan heads to the mountains to train, realizing that the only way a nobody can prove himself to Jindo is to get stronger fast. He needs to catch up to Gaihu, so he asks the Black Tiger for advice on how to beat someone bigger than him. The master tells him straight that he needs to gain muscle, or learn how to counter his enemy's techniques. He then compliments the skill Dan showed during his fight with Gaihu earlier. The master suggests the best way he can stand a chance of winning is to learn Chi Ascension techniques. His training begins with building his Chi first. The endurance training proves surprisingly effective, and his stats level up fairly fast using this method alone. Even the master is caught off guard when Dan lasts for half an hour, especially since most disciples give up after only a few minutes. The strain is too harsh on the body. After that, they head outside, where the Black Tiger casually tears through an innocent tree with a single kick. He explains that this is the power of a kick reinforced by Cherish, adding that Dan would not be walking around if Jaiho's Mountain Crusher had hit him directly. The master then decides it is better for someone his age to demonstrate how to focus Cherish into one point. So he calls over Soso, who just happens to be passing by. A few minutes later, he finds a large boulder and instructs her to show her piercing kick. The young lady's kick leaves a clear crater behind, and the master believes it will not take long before she can shatter the entire boulder. Dan notes that he has only learned sword techniques at the academy so far, but now he finally has the chance to learn all 5 techniques as a main disciple. Later on, he struggles to properly use the Chirith techniques, so the master suggests trying weapon techniques first if he cannot focus Chirith in his body yet. At that moment, Soso tells him they need to head to their next class. On the way through the bamboo forest, she explains the 5 techniques that are taught at the military academy. However, the two suddenly run into Jindo and his goons blocking their path. Soso asks what exactly he thinks he is doing, but Jindo smugly tells the princess to stay out of it, since he is not interested in her. He makes it clear that his real target here is Dan. Our boy is surprised that the scheming rat somehow knew he would pass through the forest. He comments that Jindo brought quite a crowd just to welcome him. The snake replies that they are only here to watch, then abruptly starts the duel by using the termination technique. Soso jumps in at the very last second, and Dan realizes the rascal was aiming for a lethal strike. Soso questions if he is seriously trying to kill Dan, but Jindo brushes it off, saying the top disciple could easily dodge something like that. Our boy realizes Jindo is serious this time and tightens his grip around his sword. Jindo clearly underestimates him, since all he knows is that Dan is the top disciple, with no idea how skilled he actually is with a sword. At that moment, Dan receives an emergency mission to defeat Jindo, and he steals his resolve. He even asks Jindo if he really plans to fight without using a sword, then confidently invites him to begin the duel. Jindo wonders why Dan seems so confident, but he is absolutely certain that the boy is a goner. Eager to make Dan regret challenging him, he steps forward to start the spar. From what his third eye reveals, Dan knows his senior is slightly weaker than Gichu, and plans to test this by letting him attack first. Jindo takes the bait, opening with his Teiyu slash and following up with a Heavenly Earth slash combo. Dan, however, leaps into the air, dodging both attacks and landing an unrefined Titanic Mountain Crusher. As expected, the Crusher doesn't fully land because Dan can't release his inner chi like Soso or Gichu, but he's satisfied that he managed to give his senior a hard time. He doesn't stop there, stepping on Jindo's nerves and mocking him to provoke anger. Having known Jindo from his previous life, Dan realizes how egotistical he is. Guys like him rely on 1 or 2 common combos, and before long, they start repeating those moves in every fight, turning them into fatal habits. Our boy has watched so many fights of Jindo, unlike Gichu's, that he can literally predict every move and dodge them effortlessly. Dan smiles as he avoids each attack, which only makes the senior more furious. Jindo can't believe that all his moves are being read so easily. Even Soso looks shocked, feeling as if Dan can somehow see into the future. Jindo remembers his lackey mentioning that Gichu defeated Dan using a Titanic Mountain Crusher combined with a Wind Blast. Knowing that he can't pull off a Wind Blast yet, he decides to unleash the great Titanic Mountain Crusher at full force. Dan notices his senior getting more anxious by the second, and casually asks if there's a problem. Jindo snaps at him to shut up and lunges for an attack, while our boy assumes a stance, realizing he will need to channel some of his inner chi to empower his strikes if he wants any chance of winning. Jindo mocks him for not being able to properly use the mountain crusher, then tells him to get ready as he is about to demonstrate how it should be done. Dan gathers all his strength, focusing his inner chi correctly and countering with the same move, the Thousand Army Swing. He strikes so hard that Jindo's practice sword shatters completely. Dan doesn't wait and follows up with a second Thousand Army Swing, hitting with such force that it breaks some of Jindo's ribs and sends him flying to the ground. Luckily, Dan finally completes a mission without fainting this time and is rewarded with an agility point. Seeing his sugar daddy embarrassed so badly, one of his lackeys tries to knock So-So unconscious to erase all evidence, but Mr. Ji-ho, who is practically lost on his way to class, arrives just in time and grabs his hand. He asks the senior lackey if it's really okay to sneak up on a disciple, let alone the High Lord's daughter, and gets an apology in response. He then turns to So-So, warning her to watch her back. So-So asks what he is doing here, and realizes that the musclehead has gotten lost and accidentally stumbled upon her, as if he could smell trouble. Ji-ho is impressed once again, seeing how much stronger his rival has become in just a single day. Meanwhile, Dan is ecstatic that he managed to conquer his worst nightmare with his own bare hands, and even earned an extra agility point as a reward for doing so. As the scene shifts, Dan makes his way over to the library he used to frequent as a trainee during his past life. Back then, he couldn't even throw a proper punch, which led to him being mocked and bullied relentlessly by his fellow disciples. The only place where he could feel even a little bit comfortable and safe was this library. As he slides open the door of the library, he immediately spots his first ever friend from the academy during his last life, a boy named Y Young. Just as Y notices him, he tries to sneak away quietly, not wanting to attract any trouble from the top student. Dan, however, carelessly calls out his name and approaches, introducing himself in a casual tone. Even though Y is quite anxious and wary, he forces a smile and asks politely what Dan needs. Dan then explains that he has come looking for some information on chi points to help him understand and improve his skills. Y is confused as to why a top disciple is treating him like his old buddy. Dan overwhelms him with knowledge and even promises to teach some of the secret chunbong techniques. Y can't believe this, since it is exclusive to main disciples, but Dan continues with his lectures. Mr. Dan first showcases a technique called the Shadowing Blossom and explains that even though he hasn't finished all the books in the library, he has already studied the important ones, basically learning just enough to sound impressive and maybe charm a few girls along the way. Even though Dan tries to teach him, Y doesn't want to believe that a dumb guy like him could manage anything even with instructions. Y's life changes a lot after meeting Dan. One day, while Dan is giving a lecture, Y comes early to see him and starts peeking through the window. The professor is busy reading a book and Dan completes his sentences trying to impress the girls that he already knows everything. Ji-ho mocks him and even pulls So-So into the fight, and the three start bickering in the middle of the class. As a result, all three face punishment and are instructed to go outside and raise their hands. Y notices that because of Dan, the whole academy has started to calm down, and even the bully has begun to stop bothering him. Just then, Dan steps out for his punishment with his two classmates and finds Y already waiting for him there. The senior passes by, and Dan, almost as if intentionally, completely ignores him while talking to Y, asking him to wait a bit longer since the class is about to end and their punishment will finish with it. As Y walks with Dan while he trains, Dan tells him to ignore Jindo, warning that the senior bully brings nothing but trouble. Y appreciates how hard Dan works, and Dan happily takes the praise, arguing that training hard is the only way for him to succeed. Dan then says goodbye as he leaves, and seeing him so motivated fires Y up, making him want to do more than just read books, and he wonders if he should soon start writing his own martial arts novel. He is so absorbed that he accidentally bumps into a huge belly belonging to a big guy from the Manhwa sect. By the time Y realizes that he might have messed with the wrong people, the pink-haired blade master from the Manhwa sect is already about to draw his sword. As the scene shifts, Dan pays a visit to his dad since it has been months now that he is admitted as an elite student. Our boy has earned the title of the Mythic Three, which is given to the three disciples the Academy believes will definitely pass the legendary Dragon Phoenix exam to graduate from higher institutions. The male aspirants are called Dragon while the females are named Phoenix. In his past life, the Mythic Three included Kivor, So-So, and Jindo, but this time the senior Jindo has been replaced by our boy. So far, Dan has completely changed the course of his pathetic life, and this leveling up system has given him a significant edge over the others. Our boy looks around and finds Y2 nowhere in sight. He is soon summoned by the High Lord, who explains the Academy's expectations for him. Qian tells him that as soon as the weather becomes pleasant, the escorting trial will be held, a trial that determines the qualifiers for the Dragon Phoenix exam instead of letting everyone take the test. Dan stares at the High Lord, wondering why his third eye proficiency hasn't improved yet, since he still can't see the High Lord's level. When Qian asks about the death stare, our guy excuses himself, claiming he is just too nervous. The High Lord then explains the objectives of the evaluation, telling him that he will need to protect the caravan from both natural disasters and bandits, as the escort hired for it. Qian then mentions that out of the three security groups chosen for the trial, only the Mupeng security group remains, and from now on they will only send their main disciples along. Immediately, Dan becomes anxious because this has never happened in his previous life, and he does not like the idea of going with the Mupeng group. He recalls that every traveler who went with the Mupeng security group was murdered before, making this the one place he absolutely cannot afford to go. He tries to reason with the High Lord, asking why the other groups are unavailable. Lord Qian explains that all of the Academy's accounts and contract records have been stolen, which is why negotiations with the other groups could not proceed. The only contract he now has is with the Mupeng Security Group, and since he personally knows the head of the group fairly well, there isn't much of a choice. As Dan leaves the High Lord's room, he wonders why anyone would go so far as to steal the contracts. He recalls that in his previous life, everyone who was sent with the Mupeng Security Group was later declared dead. It was a shock for the entire Seiyuan. The group was ambushed by a bunch of particularly nasty criminals known as the Prowling Dragon Clan from the League of Bandits. For some reason, their actual motives were never investigated. The most suspicious part was that no one knew about this except for the receiving party, the Manhwa sect, and moreover, both the sect and Dan's academy never bothered to investigate the case at all. Since this time Dan himself would be involved in this mess, he tries to think of a way to avoid getting caught up and kicking the bucket during a lousy selection mission. He considers directly confronting the High Lord, but quickly realizes that asking the Lord to cancel it would be out of the question, since officials would not take a child seriously. Just as he is weighing his options, the system pops up a panel with a mission, making it clear that the only option he actually has is no option at all. He is now forced to complete the escort mission for the Mupeng Security Group, in exchange for some weirdo divine gift, otherwise his system will be disrupted for a full 3 days. This mission, however, hits him like a revelation, and he gets another idea. He gathers some gold coins and rushes over to the head of the Mupeng Security Group, Zhengyi, to officially register an escort mission. He requests a single caravan to Hanzhong, an area on the opposite side of the Manhwa sect, scheduled for the first day of the next month. He hopes that this might fulfill the upcoming escort mission and also allow him to pass the trial. Zhengyi accepts the request and asks Dan to bring the materials the next day that he wishes to deliver. Just as Dan is about to leave, the Mupeng security leader recognizes him. He decides not to pry into the boy's motives, knowing that would be against the rules, but he warns him that since this happens on the same day as the escort trial, he better not try to scheme any advantage for his evaluation. Dan casually remarks that the evaluations don't matter to him, and then takes his leave. Dan feels confident that he will do well in the evaluations, and is relieved that he has handled the sudden mission. As he walks away, the Mupeng security leader mutters to himself that he will not let himself be deceived by a mere child. After taking care of the situation, Dan realizes that he now has a massive debt piling up, having borrowed money from multiple inns. Just then, Dan runs into some members of the Manhwa sect and takes a deep breath, realizing that if he had been even slightly late, he might not have been able to make his request. As he carefully examines the pink-haired guy's face, he realizes that it is none other than Chirang Yang, someone he definitely did not expect to run into here out of nowhere. Chirang glances at Dan's black robe and judges that he must be a fellow disciple of the academy, commenting that it seems like there are a lot of Chirambong Academy disciples in Sishin. Dan wonders if the guy has encountered anyone from the academy before. Chirang keeps whispering to himself about whether the people wearing robes are actually warriors or not, then walks away, suggesting that Dan could be different from them, or maybe it's just the dress code in this area. Dan grows anxious hearing Chirang's constant muttering and quickly looks at the guys nearby to check their status. He can easily see Zhong Myung's details, but for some reason he cannot see Chirang's level at all. Dan moves away from there and immediately hurries to find Wicca, suspecting that Wicca might have crossed paths with Chirang. What worries him the most is that Wicca has been absent from the academy today. Meanwhile, Zhong asks Chirang if Wicca Wudiong would be alright by himself, but the Blade Master argues that it is not their responsibility to worry about him. Back to our boy, he has found his way to the place where he believes Wicca lives and knocks at the door. Dan hears strange noises and wonders if those sounds are coming from the forest, but suddenly he notices that the door is being blocked shut from the outside. Wicca barely makes any noise while trying to explain that he has been trapped and abducted inside his own house, and Dan quickly tries to find a way to somehow open the door. Just at that moment, an arrow flies by and barely misses our boy. Dan asks the attackers what they want, but the bullies immediately start acting as if they are the police in this place, claiming that they have caught Dan as some kind of culprit. Dan tries to fight back, but the overwhelming number of senior bullies is too much for him to handle, and he gets trapped in a tight position by them. The senior with the crossbow points his arrow directly toward our guy, trying to threaten him into behaving properly. Meanwhile, Senior Jindo is having an audience with the High Lord and is trying to frame Dan and Y. He claims to the master that he and his classmates personally witnessed Y running off with the academy's fortune that very morning. To make his story sound legit, the guy brings up Y's poor background and blames him for the burglary, presenting it as if it were an obvious act. He receives praise from the High Lord for catching a supposedly problematic thief. Jindo, however, doesn't stop there and argues that a trainee like Y could never commit such a crime, claiming that he personally saw Dan supporting him from behind. He further justifies his claim by bringing up Dan's poor background as well. The High Lord orders Y be brought in immediately so that he could question his actions and punish him accordingly. However, before Jindo can leave, the Blade Master arrives and makes a strange remark, which tenses the atmosphere. The scene then shifts back to Dan, who is saved by Zheng, who intervenes and grabs the senior bully with the crossbow by his collar. The scene shifts to the past, when the Manhwa clan visitors introduce themselves to Wei. Wei immediately makes it clear that he does not want to throw hands and calmly introduces himself in return. The Blade Master is disappointed that a warrior would chicken out so easily. Even so, Wee offers them a place to stay the night at his humble abode, and the two gladly accept his offer. The following morning, they thank the kid for his kind gesture and leave. On the way, they notice a group of black-robed disciples carrying a crossbow, a sack of gold coins, and several books. Chorong finds it suspicious that they seem to be heading toward Wai's home, but he ultimately decides to ignore it. Back in the present, he greets Master Taegong like a proper gentleman. Jindo is clearly irritated by the bad timing. While the High Lord is pleased to see the Blossom Blade Master, Chorong wastes no time and states that he came to request an unlimited duel at the academy just like he promised during his last visit. Jindo thinks there is no way such a request is not too sudden, but the High Lord replies that it will not be possible due to an internal matter. The Blade Master stuns them both by calmly asking if this issue is related to some disciple named Wai. Meanwhile, his companion Jung finishes wiping the floor with Jindo's black-clad goons. Dan is shocked by how impressive the man's strength truly is. Young asks if Dan also came to help and says he is glad the military academy is not just filled with trash like Jindo's gang. The big guy then crushes the wooden lock with brute strength, freeing Wai, who is tied up inside his own home. Wai thanks him for saving his life, but Dan tells him the big guy did most of the work. Wai admits he is grateful Young arrived when he did, because his life would have been over if he came any later. When Dan wonders aloud why Jindo's goons did this, Wai explains they tried to frame him using the money. Back at Master Taegong's place, Chorong reveals the truth right in front of Jindo. He declares Wai innocent and mentions that the kind boy even let him stay the night at his home. Hearing this, the High Lord deeply apologizes and promises to discipline the brainless block standing beside him. The man with the receding hairline insists it is all a huge misunderstanding, so the master tells him to prove his innocence through a duel. He adds that while Jindo may be foolish, he is still a fine warrior and should make a decent opponent for the Blade Master. Soon the two stand face to face with real swords in their hands, leaving Jindo absolutely terrified. As soon as the duel begins, Jindo freezes in shock as the Blade Master appears behind him. With a single clean swing of his sword, he chops off Jindo's dominant hand. Later, the boys return to the academy, and the masters confirm they recovered everything that was stolen. While the Spear Lord takes Wai away for questioning, Master Mile pulls Dan aside and tells him there is an emergency situation. Chorong has started his unlimited duel, which was supposed to be a one-on-one fight. However, instead of stopping there, he chose to assert dominance by giving Jindo a humiliating defeat and then openly challenging everyone to face him. The master does not fully grasp the situation, but he tells Dan that the academy is relying on its number one to handle this crisis. At that moment, an emergency mission to defeat the Blade Master appears in front of him. Our boy is shocked that the system expects him to beat such a monster when he cannot even defeat Jiho yet. Master Mai asks if he is scared, then reassures him by saying he is also the top disciple of the academy. He gives Dan a firm slap on the back and tells him to just do his best, reminding him that he is one of the legendary 3 of the military academy. Dan feels the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him, but that responsibility also fuels his resolve. Before sending him off, the master asks him to find Jiho, who is relaxing up in a tree, and bring him along as well. Meanwhile, Soso is already locked in battle with the Blade Master, who is briefly pushed back by her unique combination of fist and sword techniques. He compliments her original combo, but she grows frustrated when she realizes he is completely unharmed. To show his skill, he draws his second sword and begins dual-wielding them Kirito style. She manages to block his technique, and the other disciples are amazed that she can hold out against him for this long. Dan arrives on the scene and points out that she is stuck in a stalemate. He can tell she will lose quickly since all she can do is defend against his strikes. Realizing this, Dan decides the best thing he can do for now is carefully observe the Blade Master's movements. Meanwhile, somewhere nearby, Giho wakes up from his nap and thinks the day feels unusually peaceful. That calm is quickly shattered when Jung suddenly appears and asks him to guide him to the training arena. Back at the arena, Dan notices that Chorang is not taking Soso seriously, and he is just messing around with her. He looks at the other disciples, believing they have probably noticed this as well. As he keeps watching more status windows with his third eye, the skill levels up and he unlocks the ability to see everyone's strength rating too. He also sees that many of them have higher strength than Soso, but it looks wrong because none of them can smash boulders like she can. Just then, Soso grows furious at Chorang for toying with her and launches a piercing kick. Dan is surprised to see her strength suddenly spike the moment she uses the technique. The Blade Master thinks he is clever, sacrificing one of his swords to block her attack, but Soso is sharper, following up with another kick that breaks his second sword. She then tries to finish him with a phoenix kick that shatters the arena, but he jumps away at the last second. With that, Dan's theory is confirmed that she really can raise her strength with chi techniques. The Blade Master is genuinely impressed by her overwhelming kicking power, but the Mount Hoei clan is not fond of foot techniques. They believe a warrior only needs powerful hands and sword techniques to be strong. To show the Mount Hoei clan's superiority, he unleashes his master technique, the Blossom Style 14 Strokes. Dan notices a strange manifestation level appearing next to his strength rating. When Chorang defeats Soso with that devastating technique, everyone is left speechless. It makes many of them question whether joining the military academy instead of the Mount Hoei clan was a mistake. Even so, Soso grits her teeth and forces herself to stand through pure willpower. Even the Blade Master is baffled that she can still stand after taking his ultimate technique head-on. Furious, So-So snaps that the way he smiled during their fight was creepy as hell. She also calls his weird blossom stroke technique extremely cringe. While her father's style does not have a long history, it is still a powerful branch of the blossom style. With that, she reveals the blossom technique unique to Master Taegong's lineage, the Rising Winter Blossom, causing a manifestation level to appear for her as well. However, she has not yet mastered it. Because of that, Chorong easily shuts it down with a brutal strike to her shoulder chibi point. As all strength drains from her body, she nearly falls to the ground before Dan catches her in time. The entire academy cheers for her, inspired by the might of their clan's technique. The low morale from moments ago completely vanishes because of her stand. Even the Blade Master is forced to admit she exceeded his expectations of the academy. With a smug grin, he says he hopes Dan will perform even better. Our boy is surprised that the man already knows his name. Chorong explains that the Manhwa clan received second priority in the security group mission because Dan signed up first. That fact seriously annoyed him and is part of why he came here. Just then, Jiho arrives as well, along with Jung, both ready to take part in the tournament. Jung apologizes for getting lost while Dan shoots Gihu a sharp side-eye for showing up so late. The Blade Master decides to take a short break, and Jung steps forward, making it clear he will fight Gihu instead. Dan braces himself, expecting a pure clash of strength between two massive fighters. Jung calmly says that if he cannot beat Gihu, then losing to Chorong makes sense, since the Blade Master is even stronger. Gihu is clearly offended by Jung already assuming his victory. Dan tosses Gihu his training sword, noticing that his strength stat has received a solid boost. The two of them quickly realize Jung is not holding a sword. The big guy casually says he does not need one. Remembering how Jung handled Jindo's goons with just palm techniques, Dan wonders if he simply cannot use a sword at all. Chorong confirms it, explaining that palm techniques are Jung's specialty. Jihu learns that the hard way when he tries to block the first strike with his sword. The impact rattles every bone in his body from the sheer power behind it. Fired up, Jihu decides to ditch his sword too, smoothly parrying the next punch and slamming a sharp elbow into Jung's shoulder. Dan and the others are impressed that he managed to hurt the giant's tough body. However, Dan notices Chorong is not worried in the slightest. He calmly watches as Jung lands a heavy blow straight into Jihu's core. Jihu manages to push him back afterward, but blood starts pouring from his nose as a deep pain twists through his insides. His strength rating drops at the same time. Chorong explains Jihu is getting weaker because he is recklessly taking the blossom palm techniques head-on. They may look like simple attacks at first, but a single hit to the core is like striking the internal organs directly. Normally, one clean blow from Jung's monstrous palms will send you straight to the hospital. Dan is shocked by that explanation, and realizes the drop in Jihu's strength means serious internal damage. Still, Jihu wipes the blood away and acts like it means nothing. He grins and tells the Blade Master to rest well, because he plans to crush him next. While Dan is not surprised by his reckless confidence, both of them know Jihu cannot keep this up much longer. Jung taunts him, asking if he can even make it to the next fight. Jihu does not hesitate, and tries to end things with his signature Mountain Crusher. Jung does not dodge it at all. Instead, he pulls out his polearm and blocks the attack head-on. He admits that Jihu is strong, but says calmly that it is still not enough to beat him. While he blocks the staff with his fist, Giho complains to Jung for bringing a staff when he had tossed away his sword for him. Even Dan is surprised to see the staff, but the Blossom Blade Master explains that just like the spear techniques used by the High Spearmen in Dan's academy, the Manhwa sect has a long and proud history. The story then shifts to Chorong's past. Jung is being mocked for not being able to learn swordsmanship. His peers pressure him, calling him a massive gorilla with no real skills beyond brute strength, and argue about how embarrassing it is for the Manhwa sect to have disciples who cannot use the Blossom Blade techniques. Chorong then steps in and hands the big guy an old book. The Blade Master tells him that it contains long-forgotten Manhwa staff techniques that might perfectly complement his virtuous blossoming palm. He boosts Jung's morale by insisting that both of them are the future of Manhwa and that they must not allow anyone to undermine them. As the story shifts back to the present, Jung is giving his all to prove his strength to Chorong. But Jihu, despite losing some strength, looks even more fired up and tells Jung that the weapon is only slowing him down. Jihu's cocky behavior gives Jung an opening for another palm attack, which Jihu barely manages to block using his crossed arms. Meanwhile, the Muping representative informs the High Lord that his girl is doing perfectly fine and then comes to join in, eager to watch the ongoing battle. Both masters are hopeful that these fights will serve as excellent opportunities for the disciples to learn a great deal. Back in the fight, Jihu struggles to deal with Jung and his staff. He attempts an attack with a kick, but Jung blocks it with the staff and forces him backward. At first, Jihu cannot even get close to Jung because of the staff, and even when he manages, the blossoming palm is ready to target his internal organs. Jihu, however, tries a direct approach. He first grabs the staff and then the big guy's other hand, delivering a hard headbutt. Jung, having a bigger head than his opponent, causes the trick to fail. Jung quickly regains control and overwhelms Jihu again, and seeing this, Dan realizes that things are only going to get worse for Jihu with every passing minute. Jihu continues to lose strength but decides to go all out. He declares that he had planned to save a move for the Blossom Blade Master, but given the current circumstances, he is forced to use it. Suddenly, his strength begins to rise marginally, approaching a full century. Jihu then unleashes an ancient technique called the Crouching Tiger Fist, ending the fight almost instantly. It seems that this technique belongs to Master Math, and even Dan is impressed by how his rival exponentially increased his strength instead of raising a manifestation level like Soso and Charang. Charang admits that he enjoyed the battle, though he is disappointed that he won't get a chance to spar against Jihu. He further comments that Jihu shouldn't have used the technique with an internal injury, but Jihu is still fired up and has practically lost his mind. The idiot seems to have muscles where his brain should be, as he now challenges Charang despite bleeding heavily. The masters watching are impressed by the crouching tiger fist, but the High Lord is even more eager to see the next matchup. Dan enters the sparring field and tells Jihu that he will sit this one out. He gently snaps at Jihu's neck, knocking him down. Before beginning the spar with Dan, he opens his status window for one last look before the battle. He learned about this status window back when he was just level 4. After defeating Jindo, Dan didn't stop. He continued his grueling training, focusing on increasing his basic stamina and vitality. He pushed past his limits repeatedly, improving his stats over and over again. He also did cardio and practiced extensively with both axe and sword proficiency. Dan soon discovered that after reaching level 2 in a weapon proficiency, his weapons start boosting his stats automatically, like the sword at level 2 now increasing his attack speed, while the axe enhances his strength. As the story shifts to the higher-ups, the Mupping representative asks the High Lord what he has taught Dan. Wondering why he is so eager to see him spar, the High Lord replies that he hasn't taught the boy much, considering Dan barely picks up anything beyond the basics. The Mupping security leader questions why the High Lord thinks so highly of a boy who is practically dirtborn. The High Lord argues that it's hard to explain and hopes that the Mupping representative might understand for himself today. Back to the spar, Dan skips all the courtesy talk and heads straight into the battle. His attack is easily dodged by the Blade Master, who finds nothing impressive in Dan's speed. Trong uses his 5-step blossom to create distance, but Dan sticks close to him. Trong then strikes with the 14 blossoming strike, which Dan blocks, yet the Blade Master uses the moment to try and discard his sword. Dan, however, switches his fighting approach to a no-style method called the freestyle, and grabs his sword from the opposite end before it slips away. He quickly seizes the hand side instead. The Mupping representative points out that it's starting to look like a common brawl, upon which the High Lord explains that Dan isn't the type to chase flashy techniques like his rivals. His primary goal is to strike the opponent at a vital point. Trong compares Dan to a soldier fighting for his life, and argues that even if the blade were steel, Dan might have acted the same way. Meanwhile, the young Blade Master is left questioning whether he is even facing a true warrior disciple, as all he can see from Dan is the lesser Azure sword style that trainees learn, not the techniques of the main disciples. Trong finds this disgraceful and launches a counterattack using another special move called the Heavenly Flowing Blossoms. Dan quickly realizes that he cannot dodge this kind of technique and immediately pulls a special trick from his arsenal. He literally vanishes and reappears behind the guy. The masters are startled by such a spectacular move, something even the High Lord had not expected to witness today. Trong once again acknowledges the boy's strength. Meanwhile, it is the first time Dan has used this footwork style technique called Bobiup, which he gains after defeating Jihar. Before continuing his spar with the Blade Master, Dan notices that the information above Gihar's head is red, signaling that the brain-dead idiot wants to face him as well. Dan uses this to his advantage, delivering a slap that is enough for the system to register it as Gihar's defeat, earning our boy a free skill. The martial arts skill called Bobiup is a type of footwork. Dan hasn't had the time to read its full description, but one thing he is certain of is that it is a teleportation move he can use to get out of dangerous situations. Seeing him smile, Charang attacks again, forcing Dan to expend another of the 3 casts he has for this skill. 1 stack could be regained in about 5 minutes, but the battle isn't going to last that long. Since the footwork teleports the user randomly, this time Dan appears from above with an attack, but as expected he misses. He then quickly follows up with his 1000 army swing to avoid letting Charang get away, and to prevent being hit by any counterattack from him. All Dan is hoping for is a single opening, yet Charang just smiles and mocks him, telling him that he is worthless, and that he can't even properly control the tri-principal chi required to execute the sword style correctly. Charang then lands his ultimate move while commenting that he has been left thoroughly disappointed. The story then jumps many years into the future, a period Dan has once experienced before. The secret techniques of the Manhwa sect were published in the form of a book by a member of the demonic cult named Cheon Ma. The grimoire was titled Strategies Against Manhwa Sect, and the sect was nearly wiped out until Cheon Ma rose and developed countermeasures against the strategy book. The strategy book eventually became widely known, and even common soldiers at that time, like Dan, had the chance to get their hands on it. As the scene shifts back to the present, Dan has barely managed to avoid a strike that could have knocked him out while still taking significant damage. Since the strategy book hasn't been established yet, Dan knows that Cheon Ma remains unaware, and he has used this knowledge to his advantage to survive the potentially fatal blow. The trick behind the blossom techniques is that they are fragrance-based, which means that they release a scent when the Cheon is unleashed by the user. Dan exploits this loophole to his benefit, allowing him to partially dodge the attack from a stronger opponent. He grows anxious because he knows he has only survived this far thanks to his Bobiop skill, yet the problem is that he can now use it only once more. Meanwhile, Charang looks both surprised and disappointed at our guy at the same time, arguing that he is going to get serious now and it should take him only 5 moves to defeat Dan. On the other hand, Dan is putting everything on a single counterattack, knowing it might be his only chance to take down a superior warrior. Our boy recalls how his friendship with Gihu and Soso inspires him to keep pushing harder and getting stronger, so he can walk alongside them as an equal. Just as Charang launches his final attack, Dan tosses up his sword and grips it by the hilt, making the system register it as an axe, a cheat that boosts his strength by a staggering 20%. The Blossom Blade Master unleashes his ace move, the 5 Blossom Rush, slicing through Dan, or at least that's what it looks like to him. In reality, Dan has used his last Bobiop stack and vanished. Charang quickly spins around expecting an attack from behind, but Dan appears from the front saying peekaboo and grabs the guy's head. Dan then finally unleashes his ultimate original move, the Warrior Special Nut-Cracking Technique, using the hilt of his sword. Unluckily for the Blossom Blade Master, the attack triggers a critical strike, castrating half of the poor fellow. The system congratulates Dan on landing his first ever critical strike, and as a special bonus, grants him a permanent 1% increase in critical strike chance. Even in such a state, Charang manages to counterattack, knocking out Dan in the process. But since Charang falls first, the system counts it as Dan's victory and completes the mission, unlocking an inventory skill as the reward. However, the Blade Master doesn't go down that easily, and loses himself to madness. The guy literally goes crazy and rushes toward our guy with murderous intent, until the Masters step in and restrain him. While fading into unconsciousness, Dan argues to himself that this was payback for toying with Soso, making it clear just how much he cares for her. As the story shifts, Dan finds himself trapped in a dream tied to his past life. In it, his wife leaves him for Charang, and he shouts after her desperately, literally begging her to wait and saying he will soon become a warrior. He curses the Blade Master under his breath, talking trash about him and swearing that he will eventually lose to Charang no matter what. As revenge for stealing his wife away, the guy uses his ultimate nut-cracking technique, completely wrecking his family jewels. Shouting that out loud, Dan suddenly wakes up in a panic, freaking everyone around him out instantly. As he sits up, Soso laughs at him after seeing him completely wrapped in bandages. She tells him that they are required to visit the High Lord soon. Dan wonders aloud, mocking the situation, if this might be a side effect of his nut-cracking technique. Later inside the office, Dan learns that he only half-wrecked the guy. Luckily for Charang, 1 nut survived, which might be enough for him. Seeing Dan almost laughing, the High Lord tells him to be a bit more serious about the matter. But Dan keeps joking anyway, shifting all the blame onto Charang for having such fragile family jewels. Soso cannot hold herself back and bursts into wild laughter, while her father tells both of them to get serious immediately. He explains that someone like Charang is considered an Eternium born, which is far more glorified than Soso, who is a prestigious Bolden born. Hearing that, Dan asks the High Lord what he should do to get himself out of trouble safely. The High Lord suggests that Dan offer a proper apology during his visit to the Manhwa sect. Right on cue, the system pops up an apology mission, and it turns out that simply apologizing will reward him with a main map. Dan wonders if he will ever be free from these stupid sudden missions popping up non-stop. He puts his pride aside and decides to play along for now, motivated to rise higher and change everything later. After accepting the suggestion humbly, he pays his respects to the master and takes his leave politely. While walking down the stairs, Soso brings up their upcoming escort mission, and Dan feels hopeful that things might work out since he changed the destination earlier. As they reach the bottom, people are gathered around cheering for him, and Soso explains that it is because they all watched him defeat the Blade Master. Just then, Giho rushes over and drops the bad news that the caravan they are escorting is headed straight to the Manhwa sect. That means all of Dan's effort might have been completely pointless. Later, the Mooping security leader confirms that his request for the escort mission was cancelled. The previous day, Charang visited him in person and made a special request. Dan understands they had no real choice but to accept the Blade Master's request, and he does not have to be sorry for anything. The representative hands him 3 times the original payment as compensation, but Dan explains he cannot complete the mission without an escort present. Just then, he gets a clever idea and asks if they can register another escort instead. He returns the bag of money and asks the leader to escort it back to him later on. Confused, the man questions whether this is some kind of prank, but our boy makes it clear he is not capping, and he even offers to pay extra for the strange request. That satisfies the representative, and he quietly accepts the unusual deal. The two exchange their items on the spot, and the system confirms the mission is complete. Now that is a dumb high 169 IQ play right there, Chief. Dan looks quite satisfied afterward, while the moping leader stands there wondering if the boy truly wanted to trade that badly. Meanwhile, as our boy celebrates his divine gift reward, Jindo watches him carefully from around the corner. The sore loser mutters to himself, trying to think of some plan to get revenge. Before his 5 functioning brain cells can form anything useful, our boy suddenly disappears from his sight. Dan appears right behind Jindo and makes it clear that he has not forgotten everything he has done. Jindo sweats heavily, confused about how Dan became so strong so fast. Dan lets Jindo go, warning him clearly that he has his eyes on him. When Jindo asks about the secret behind his insanely fast growth, Dan honestly replies that he has no idea himself. All he knows is that he will keep grinding until his luck finally runs out. Still not learning his lesson, Jindo tries to launch a surprise attack, but our boy quickly disarms him and beats him down hard. He then tries his best to convince the onlookers that the cripple he just knocked out actually tried to assassinate him. After that, he turns his attention to his rewards stored safely inside his inventory. A bright flash of light surrounds him when he shouts out inventory. Inside the massive white space, he sees a blue orb that contains his divine gift. As an experienced orb breaker, he cracks it open without much hesitation at all. While he hopes for a mythical pet or a chair-boosting potion, his divine gift turns out to be a small, cute kitty. He barely has time to process the disappointment before a police officer snaps him back to reality. The officers plan to interrogate him at first, but they quickly apologize once he shows his military academy certificate. He explains that the fool tried to attack him and his cat, and the officers thank him for skillfully handling the criminal situation. During the brief commotion, a carriage passes by, and the government official inside wonders what the fuss is about. Dawn instantly recognizes the man as the well-known alcoholic Minister Sung, and realizes he will be vital to his future plans. He joins the minister for a few drinks until late evening. Dawn is confident in his drinking skills, but he nearly passes out right in front of the seasoned drunkard. Later that night, he brings the bottle gifted to him back home for his father. He also tells his father that the cat is a divine gift, but the most divine thing in his old man's eyes is the bottle of booze. After a few drinks together, his father grows proud of his son for climbing the ranks through hard work and even mingling with ministers. He repeats his age-old advice that hard work always pays off in the end. Our boy is not really a fan of that phrase, but he is happy to see his father in such a good mood. As he pours another drink, he politely asks his father to stop going to the dirty Ochon village so often. His father does not take his words seriously, though, since he is more concerned about why his bottle of divine soju is suddenly empty. It turns out the cat drank every last drop of that alcoholic goodness without shame. Because of its drinking habits, Dan names the soju-loving cat Juju. Watching the warm scene between his father and the cat, Dan vows to return alive from the escort mission, even if he has to defeat the dastardly dragon clan. On the day of the escort, he pours a small drink for his cat and says his goodbyes quietly. With his battle uniform on and sword ready at his side, he sets off for the Mount Huao escort trial. You see, the purpose of the annual escort mission is to decide which disciples are worthy of entering the Dragon Phoenix exam later. There are 3 security teams participating this year, including our trio and the Mooping security group. As the trial begins, everyone starts moving the cargo around quickly. The Mooping leader's eyes stay locked on our boy, who stands out in more ways than one. Master Taegong is surprised to see he is participating too, and the man replies that it is only natural since Soso is part of the mission. The master then shares that he has already decided where he will marry her off, since she is now 16. At first, he considered Hao Seixian, but his plan changed after seeing what a fine man Mount Hua's Blossom Blade Master has become. The Mupping leader is not very fond of this decision, because Churong is known to have some disturbing behavior in the bedroom, but Master Taegong claims his daughter can handle anything for the sake of the family name. The leader dares to suggest that the Mount Hua clan might reject the proposal. Her father tells him to focus on his job, confident they will say yes anyway. The leader admits she is beautiful, but her rough personality makes her feel more of a warrior than waifu material. At the same time, Soso's father directly asks him to keep Dan in line, since he might mess everything up. Nearby, a fat escort agent tells the disciples to stop slacking off and get ready. That is, until he notices Dan's supplies. The man is blown away that Dan even knew he should bring along a cooking pot. Soon, the security group leader announces that the flag holder will receive 10 extra points in the evaluation. One disciple experienced in carrying flags volunteers to do it, but the leader tells him to lift it once before accepting the duty. The guy grips it tightly, but the flag is so heavy that he bends forward, barely managing to hold it up. Our boy already knows the Mount Hua clan flag is not normal, weighing over 150 pounds. Watching Dan yawn in boredom, the leader figures out he was already informed about the flag's heavy weight beforehand. Even so, acting sloppy as an escort agent is dangerous for the client. Because of that, Dan loses 10 points in the evaluation immediately. The leader adds more punishment, saying he will still carry the flag without receiving any bonus points. At first, Dan wants to complain, but he puts on a wide smile and acts like it is nothing. The leader is surprised by his calm attitude, but for Dan, this is just part of his endurance training rather than punishment. The leader then pulls out a long scroll and marks 3 more deductions from Dan's score, just because the grumpy old man cannot stand his positive vibes. On the second day of the escort, the mad lad deducts points again because Dan takes a dump the wrong way. That does not really matter though, because our boy is far more concerned about the upcoming ambush. By the third day, the so-called legendary 3 of the military academy continue losing points for being sloppier than ChatGPT. The leader grows mildly worried that Dan will fail if he keeps losing points like this. Still, he is genuinely impressed that the boy has not complained about carrying the flag even once. Normally, his subordinates take turns holding that boisterous heavy flag. Because of that, he considers giving our boy some positive points for persistence. However, he quickly changes his mind and scraps the idea because he believes Dan's patience will crack soon enough. By the 9th day, the leader notes that a skilled escort agent should survive easily in the wild. Besides basic survival skills, Dan is able to cut hair, mend his shoes, and cook meals for everyone. His excellent rabbit stew turns the entire camp into fans of his cooking. Seeing all this, the leader invites our boy to meet him after he finishes his duties. Later, the man offers Dan a drink as they talk casually. Dan is tempted at first, but he politely declines the offer since it is his turn to keep watch. The man jokes that this is his only chance, wearing a cheeky smile that surprises Dan, revealing even the cold leader has a goofy side. He asks if Dan really thought he was not capable of laughing at all. Dan answers honestly that it is hard to judge someone you do not know when they silently grade you from a distance. Hearing that, the man apologizes to him, admitting he did not know Dan well enough and misjudged him earlier. He assures Dan not to worry anymore, explaining he currently has the highest evaluation among everyone present. Still, he is still curious about how Dan became so skilled at his duties. Despite having 30 years of experience slaving away in this line of work, my guy says he will trade his secret for a taste of the fine liquor in the leader's hand. The leader accepts his deal, and Dan reveals that he learned everything from a book on the art of escorting. The book was published around the same time he is currently living in. So it is a safe enough answer. The Mooping leader is so impressed by Dan's skills that he decides to have his entire team study from the book as well. Amazed, he asks our boy if he would consider joining his company someday. It would not take long for someone of his talent to become the world's #1 escort with wealth and fame. Instead, Dan proudly declares that he wants to delete escort work entirely and become the world's #1 at something greater. Before the leader can feel offended by his offer being rejected, Dan excuses himself and returns to his post to keep watch. On his way back, he feels slightly embarrassed by how boldly he declared his goal to be #1. Suddenly, he hears a message that only he can perceive through the focused voice technique. The sender turns out to be one of the minister's men. The voice confirms that Dan's information about the ambush was correct, but he must not inform the escort team about it. Dan understands that the minister's group plans to arrest the Dragon Clan themselves and take the credit for a promotion. Still, he is glad that his conversation with the minister ended up being a success. The voice instructs him to fire the military-grade flare given to him at the moment the attack begins. Once it is launched, every soldier within a 1-mile radius will immediately rush over to provide backup. The scene shifts to Mount Yahello, which is said to house the tomb of Emperor Jinshi, a place rumored to contain a bone-chilling fortune. Because of that, many factions waged war endlessly to seize control of the infamous land. It is said the nearby river once turned red from the blood of countless fallen soldiers. The warrior responsible for finally ending the war was said to be so powerful that he cleaved the mountain clean in half. After hearing the legend, Jihu immediately calls cap on the obviously fake-sounding claim. But then he pauses and admits it might actually be possible if that warrior was fueled by something like Dan's heavenly rabbit stew. Our hero appreciates the compliment, and Jihu's idea is not far off, since the food Dan prepares really does raise their stats for an entire day. Still, Dan believes the legend is not far-fetched at all, because he has seen the evil spirit that will appear 30 years in the future. When that monster used the Chema three-sword technique, it literally split the ocean into 2 halves. That was why it earned the title of the Celestial Demon of Chema. The party sets up camp near Mount Yahello, and Jihu asks Dan if he is up for cooking more stew again tonight. Dan agrees, telling him to hunt some rabbits and calling it a fair deal. The hungry hippo takes off immediately, but leader Jin Goji asks him to catch 2 more rabbits for 5 bonus points in his assessment. In the meantime, Dan and Soso forage around for other usable ingredients nearby. Out of nowhere, she suddenly becomes formal with him, which makes him feel a little strange inside. When she asks how she should address him instead, he tells her to use his name like she always has. Soso teasingly asks what he will do if she refuses to. Bro tries to riz her up, saying she is always welcome to call him Mr. Handsome anytime. Soso is not amused and says she is also welcome to beat him up as well. Soon it starts raining lightly, and she comments that their journey ahead will be quite rough. Dan asks if she hates the idea of going to Mount Huara that much. She is surprised that he already knows about the arrangement, to which he jokes that it became obvious when her father whispered orders into the leader's ear earlier. Then he points out that she is not the type to blindly go along with things if she does not think they are right. Soso goes quiet for a moment, so he tries to cheer her up by saying she is way too hot for a one-balled samurai anyway. The two have a warm moment, and she thanks him for finally clearing the air between them. He tells her she can always show her gratitude by calling him Riz Lord from now on. Before she tries to beat him up again, he stops her abruptly because he sees something shift in the bushes. His eyes go wide in shock when he realizes there are more than 50 level bars flashing above the foliage. Grinning faintly, Dan figures he is a goner this time. He immediately grabs Soso by the hand and runs as fast as humanly possible. In this timeline, the mission's destination was changed, and this time the prowling dragon clan is attacking in the middle of the glaring day. The girl is baffled, wondering why a massive gang of bloodthirsty bandits is attacking them on an isolated mountain. They sprint as fast as they can without even daring to look back, heading for the camp where Giho and the leader are already waiting with the rabbits. But when they glimpse the enormous gang behind them, the leader orders his subordinate to sound the warning bells immediately. The man blows the war horn as hard as he possibly can, and all the escort members scramble into position. As the group gets surrounded, panic spreads like wildfire. But Dan is the most panicked of them all because he cannot find anything to light the flare properly. They didn't make a campfire because of the relentless rain, and now he is left completely helpless with no way to call reinforcements quickly. Suddenly, he receives a mission to defeat the prowling dragon clan. The other disciples act like disorganized idiots, rushing straight toward their deaths out of sheer fear. The bandits rain terror over all of them for a moment, but everything changes when the second one of the attackers has his upper body separated cleanly from the lower half. Dan yells at the top of his lungs that disciples are far more skilled than a bunch of weapon-waving brain-rot bandits. In reality, he can clearly see that most of the attackers are level 5 or lower, so he knows without a doubt that his friends are way stronger. As he cuts down enemy after enemy with brutal efficiency, he also tries to figure out a way to light the signal flare. He knows that their defensive formation will only hold if the number of surrounding enemies remains relatively small. What's worse, the leader is completely surrounded by enemies, so he cannot issue orders at all. He takes matters into his own hands and steps up as the lead himself. First, he orders the others to form the 6-strike formation properly. The tables turn fast as Soso and Giwi pick up the pace, cutting down enemy numbers efficiently. Giwi even starts enjoying himself a little too much, letting his guard slip slightly. But Dan saves him from losing his neck in a single misstep, reminding his bro that they once dreamed of joining the alliance together. The 3 legends of the military academy continue to put these grown men to shame effortlessly. One of the marauders yells at his men to grow some darn balls. They are literally dying to a bunch of newbies. The man barking orders, who is clearly their leader, suddenly hears a mysterious voice echoing through the chaos. He furiously yells at the owner of the voice to show himself immediately. The voice obliges, introducing itself as the Flames of Justice. Flames that the rain cannot put out erupt and engulf the leader instantly. At the same time, the signal flare lights up on our hero's hip automatically. Wasting not a single second, he places the firework carefully on the ground. The firework shoots high into the sky and explodes, signaling the reinforcements to come charging. With that done, he moves on to his next mission, clearing out the remaining trash mobs. The bandits panic the moment they see their boss get roasted like that. They scatter and run like cowards, knowing there is nothing they can do as the prowling dragon clan effectively disbands. Suddenly, his gaze shifts to a massive figure emerging from behind the bandits, whose level he cannot read at all. The hulking behemoth smashes his own subordinate with a mace, crushing the skull of the other one, making excuses. He yells out that his allies are pathetic, and real warriors only get more fired up after their leader is killed. Dan nearly has a stroke when he realizes the giant is level 19 with over 100 strength. He instantly understands that this fight is a lost cause, and turns around to retreat. The brute finds it amusing that the most aggressive fighter from moments ago is now running for his life. Despite his size, the giant is fast enough to catch up. Instead of dodging, our boy blinks above him and attempts to finish the fight with a single slash to the neck. The big man sees through it and counters with his club. A sharp burst of pain shoots through Dan's arm as the sheer force fractures his bones. In that instant, he knows this is not an opponent he can handle alone. He immediately calls for everyone's help, ordering them to form a hoof formation around him. The disciples move into position without hesitation, waiting for his next command. Together they unleash the 1,000 army swing technique in an attempt to overwhelm the monster. Dan is shocked that he has to use such a technique on what should have been a random mercenary. The giant roars in fury and answers with a single roundhouse swing, sending all of them flying backward. Dan grits his teeth, realizing the real problem is the massive club made of pure metal. It is so heavy that their weapons are practically useless against it. In that case, he takes a gamble and charges straight at the scoundrel. As expected, the man swings straight down, trying to crush him from above, and Dan attacks with his axe from below. But at the very last second, he lets go of his heavy sword, which sharply boosts his attack speed. That sudden burst of speed lets him fool the big guy, dodging the strike and slicing his neck clean off. All the prowling dragon members stare dumbfounded as their strongest warrior crashes to the ground. Meanwhile, our hero smiles proudly, having perfectly executed his clever plan. The next day, a system panel informs him that his mission is complete and grants him universal language interpretation. The soldiers who arrived late successfully captured all of the surviving members. While none of the disciples died, there were countless casualties among the Muping security agents overall. The minister's subordinate thanks Dan for his information and respectfully conveys the minister's gratitude. Our hero feels a little disheartened, though, because the soldiers seemed more focused on capturing bandits for promotion than protecting the agents properly. Hearing this, the leader questions why he was never informed about this insider information earlier. Brawl starts sweating, unsure how to properly defuse the situation smoothly. But then the leader apologizes for questioning him like that, admitting he probably would not have believed him anyway, even if he said it. He bows and sincerely begs for forgiveness, thanking him deeply for saving his people from the prowling dragon clan. All the surviving agents also bow in gratitude together, making him feel awkward and embarrassed inside. But Gehu assures him that last night was a massive achievement that saved everyone's lives. Soso agrees, saying she was fully prepared to fight to the death herself. Impressed, she asks just how he stayed calm enough to strategically lead everyone through the chaos. He feels a little strange seeing her act so innocent compared to the cold-blooded warlord Soso he knows well. He realizes she only changed that way because of her dramatic marriage and divorce with Churang. Putting that aside for now, the security group leader announces that because of the serious incident, the disciples have the choice to return home safely. However, those who choose to continue the mission will be guaranteed a pass and qualify for the Dragon Phoenix exam directly. Dan gains appreciation for leader Jongi's leadership skills as the man motivated everyone to stay with an offer too good to pass up. Compared to him, all the leaders Dan knew felt like worthless snobs, busy drinking tea and playing games while their men gave their lives on the battlefield. Still, the memory of one exceptional leader from his former life makes him smile faintly. That man had a serious drinking problem, but he was brutally honest with the troops, openly admitting they were just meat shields for the higher-ups. He made it clear that they were all being sent to their deaths anyway, so have-nots like them could either waste their lives complaining or train hard to survive. During their introduction, he asked Dan for his name, and when he was promoted to captain officially. When he learned they were both promoted on the same day, his very first order was for Dan to become his friend. His top-tier leadership made his troops so strong that they won 15 out of the 16 missions they were sent on successfully. On the final mission, leader Hanjin was fatally injured in battle. Dan was horrified, but Hanjin turned around with a wide grin on his face, asking why he was making such an ugly expression. His smile never faded even in his dying moments, proud of his friend for saving many lives that day. Back with the team, Soso asks Dan about his other master out of curiosity. He admits that the man taught him many things besides just martial arts. Soso grows curious, so she asks where this mysterious master of his actually lives. He casually tells her he is a man with drinking problems who lives at the very top of the mountain they are heading to. She gets angry, thinking he believes she is dumb enough to fall for that. Another reason for her sudden mood swing is that she has been carrying cargo since they cannot bring horses up the mountain. The group grows tired from climbing what feels like an endless flight of stairs until eventually there are no stairs left at all. Soso happily announces that they have finally reached their destination, but she soon realizes she is completely wrong. As she continues forward, Dan quickly stops her from speed running to her death on an escort mission. Both of them are horrified when they see narrow wooden planks lodged into the mountainside acting as makeshift stairs. Dan knows the path to the Manhwa clan is dangerous, but even he did not expect something like this. At that moment, the Muping leader steps onto the planks with the flag, declaring that his agents are already used to traveling this perilous route. Hearing that, Dan shows his nerve by grabbing one of the cargo boxes and casually hopping up the planks like it is a game. He confidently says it should not be too hard if the Manhwa disciples climb this path every day. That immediately fires up Yahello as well, who grabs two larger boxes from the others and starts leaping like a ninja. Soso refuses to be left behind, so she wastes no time joining them without hesitation. Everyone else can only stare in disbelief at the trio dancing with death at full speed, deciding it is wiser to climb slowly and carefully instead. Soon enough, they reach the very top and find a beautiful little village resting on the mountain peak. While the main gate is carved with words praising virtue, Dan feels annoyed that the stuck-up disciples inside seem to embody the exact opposite. As soon as the group passes through the gate, a burly guard suddenly shouts for them to halt. Jung and several other clan members surround them, and the man who turns out to be the big guy's older brother formally welcomes their arrival. The security group leader calmly informs him that they are here to deliver the goods exactly as promised. After glancing over the stacked boxes, Jung's brother does not look particularly impressed at all. When the leader asks for payment, the amount is so absurdly high that Jung's brother doubts it. However, the leader explains that the request came directly from the Blossom Blade Master himself. Hearing that, something clicks in Jung's brother's mind, and he immediately starts acting like the price is nothing special. Instead of ending things there, he asks them to carry the cargo just a bit farther, even though the delivery is already complete. The security group leader knows Soso needs to meet Churang, but he agrees anyway out of basic politeness. When he asks whether the boxes should be taken into the main building, the older brother casually says the cliff outside will do. Once the escort agents finally move all the boxes to the spot, the piece of dung simply kicks them off the edge without warning. All the effort spent hauling them up the mountain is discarded in an instant. Jiho, Soso, and nearly everyone present just stare in stunned confusion, wondering what the hell they just witnessed. The deafening sound of boxes filled with rocks smashing below echoes throughout the entire village. Inside the main building, the Chorang's master asks him if that welcome is a little too rude, but the Blade Master shows no guilt whatsoever. Jiho and Soso can barely process why they were forced to haul rocks up the mountain for this. Dan, however, quickly connects the dots in his head. Even the leader struggles to understand what could justify going to such extremes. His head agent is openly furious at the completely unacceptable behavior. But Jung's brother, Ho Myung, shows absolutely no shame, and instead asks if the one who defeated their young master is among the group. Everyone quickly understands the situation once they realize the true reason behind this entire ruse. Dan realizes this mess is entirely his fault, so he tries to step forward. However, the security group leader subtly signals him to stay back and pretends to play dumb, calmly claiming he is unaware of anyone like that and wishes to leave immediately. While Dan does not have the best relationship with him, this moment makes it clear that the leader is actually a kind gentleman at heart. Unfortunately, he also has a quest to apologize to Churang, or he will end up unconscious for 3 straight days. That is why Dan steps forward himself with an exaggerated grin plastered on his face. He boldly announces that he was the one who crushed half of the Blade Master's masculinity in battle. Jung's brother is appalled by the sheer audacity and says he never expected the warrior who defeated their master to be such an immature kid. Dan immediately fires back that the Blade Master must really suck if he lost to a kid. Furious, the older brother accuses him of relying on dirty tactics to win. Our boy counters that it is called technique when Manhwa wins, but it suddenly becomes dirty tactics when someone else beats them. To settle the argument, the man suggests they decide who is right through an honorable duel. When Jung unsheathes his sword, the Muping leader gets visibly worried. Dan reassures him, saying the clan has shown great disrespect to the security group because of him, and this is his way of taking responsibility. Jung's brother sternly orders him to make up for the embarrassing defeat with this duel. Seeing that, Dan remarks that it feels quite unfair to send their strongest member from the very start. Jung's brother scoffs at the ridiculous idea, claiming Jung is actually the weakest member in the entire clan. But Dan does not buy it at all, since he can already see the truth clearly with his third eye. Then, Dan slips his hands into his coat, terrifying the brothers who think he is about to pull out assassination tools. To their complete surprise, he pulls out juicy rice balls and starts chowing down on them like KFC fried chicken. He plays it off as simple hunger, but the real purpose is to temporarily boost his strength and speed. Seeing that even makes his friends briefly doubt whether he will actually win. With that, Jung tells him to draw his sword, but Dan calmly declines and says he does not need to use one either. Jung responds that sword arts are Manhwa's specialty, so he will use a blade even though palm techniques are his strong suit. Jung's brother tells him to stop wasting time, convinced Dan will draw his sword once he realizes he has no other choice. Growing irritated, Hom-young declares he will take the duel himself instead of his useless brother. Dan feels annoyed, realizing this stubborn mindset is exactly why their clan never survived, with fools like Hom-young suppressing truly talented people. With that, the fight begins as Hom-young opens with the 7 blossom slashes. Dan easily dodges the slow swings and counters with a clean kick straight to the head. He follows up with another kick, sending the potato-headed man crashing to the ground. Dan steps on him, making it clear the fool should respect his brother and stop interfering in a match that was already decided.